Welcome everyone to the session on startup accelerators, trends, and niches. It's really good to see you today. Sorry we're running a little bit behind schedule due to the rest of the program running a little bit behind schedule, but it's good to see you all here. My name is Dave Moskovitz. I'll be your moderator and one of the presenters for the session. I am the country manager for Gen New Zealand. And we also have Genevieve Edens, who is the Director of Research and Impact at the Aspen Network for the Development of Entrepreneurship. And now, Genevieve has also been involved in the Global Accelerator Learning Initiative, GALI, which just released its data set a couple of weeks ago, and it's a sort of open source look at lots and lots of data from many accelerators around the world. And she's going to be telling us a bit about her data set. We also have Wael Desouki Beddah, who runs a supply chain accelerator at the Arab Academy for Science, Technology, and Marine Transport in Cairo. And he'll be telling us about his accelerator. And we also have Sophia Muradyan, who works at the World Bank, and she's a specialist in incubation and acceleration in emerging markets. She's leading a study on acceleration in sub-Saharan Africa, which she will tell us about in her presentation. And as I said, my name is Dave Moskovitz. I'm actually spend most of my time mentoring entrepreneurs in accelerators, and during my presentation, I'll be telling you about the GovTech Accelerator that we have in New Zealand, which has involved a number of government departments and is producing some really interesting results, getting private-public partnership, new startups out the door to solve hard government problems. So the format of the session, we will have four brief presentations, and then we'd like to throw it open for question and answers from you guys, and maybe you guys will have a chance to share some of your acceleration experiences as well. So I would now like to ask Genevieve to get into her presentation. Thanks.
Thank you. That's me. Everyone can hear me okay? I have a cough, so I apologize if I cough into this microphone. I will try not to. So I'm talking about the data that we have on acceleration. So first, just to get a sense of who's in the room, how many of you work for an accelerator? And keep your hands up. How many of you are an entrepreneur that's gone through an accelerator program? And how many of you are investors that work with accelerators to look for pipeline? Ooh, not very many. And how many of you fund accelerators in some way or provide capacity support? Great. So it's probably about half of you in the room are intimately involved with accelerators, and half of you maybe are here to learn something about them. Excuse me. So I'm going to start with sort of an overview of interest in accelerators. And if you look at Google searches of startup accelerators, you'll see a huge uptick in the last 5 years. This really reflects, I think, what we've felt on the ground as we've talked to people. All of a sudden, there is huge interest in acceleration as a way to get entrepreneurs to the next stage. But if you put it in perspective, and you look at that huge uptick when you compare it to business incubator searches on Google, it's actually really tiny. And it's actually really concentrated in the US, whereas business incubators have been around for decades and are really established all over the world. Accelerators are a pretty new phenomenon. And they're basically like a shiny new toy that we get to play with. We don't really know too much about them yet. We're trying to figure it out. But people see a lot of potential in them. They're a way to potentially effectively allocate seed funding to a big range of entrepreneurs. It might be a way to drive stronger entrepreneurial ecosystems by crowding in more VC investment in a particular city. Or maybe it's a way to solve a social problem or to solve an industry challenge if you work with an accelerator that's really niche and specialized in a particular vertical. So there's a lot of excitement, but we don't know too much. And so that's why GALI was formed. Whoops. Excuse me. So GALI, the Global Accelerator Learning Initiative, is a partnership between a lot of organizations, including mine, the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs, and an academic institution, Emory University, in the US. And we are really interested in exploring this question. Do accelerators work? And this is a big question, so we actually need to break it down because it's too much for us to handle in one go. So first we look at what is an accelerator, because it's not actually all that clear. And instead of thinking about looking at what already existed in terms of reports on accelerators and looking at those definitions, we decided to start from scratch in a way, because the reports that are out there mostly focus on the US and Europe, and we really care about what's happening in emerging markets. And what's happening in emerging markets we've seen is that the model that developed in the US is adapted and shifted so that it works in different contexts. So we wanted to really understand what is happening on the ground based on the data. So we did a scan and found about 400 organizations that run accelerators all over the world. We did some web research on them to look at these 3 criteria. Were they cohort-based, so did they work with multiple entrepreneurs at a time? Did they have a time-bound program that had a distinct beginning and end? And then did they feature an investor event? So was there a pitch day or a demo day to culminate the program? And we found 320 that met at least one of those 3 criteria, and we sent them all a survey. And 115 organizations responded. And from that data, oh gosh, sorry, I've got a trigger finger here. We found 83 that met at least 2 of those criteria. So we decided that I swear it's not me, those 2 criteria were really how we were going to define accelerators. Okay. So they're cohort-based, and they run programs that are between 1 month and 12 months long. And we're going to move on. So using that definition, which is a much broader definition of an accelerator than you'll see in a lot of reports that focus on the US, we conducted an analysis of how accelerators are structured. And I encourage you, I swear I'm not touching this, I encourage you to go to our website, galleydata.org, to explore some of the results. You can sort of play with what's interesting to you. But right now I want to talk about what it is an accelerator in the context of emerging markets. And I want to compare it to the archetype of the accelerator that most of us think about, which is Y Combinator. And so comparing it to this other kind of type of accelerator. So when we think about Y Combinator, they're extremely selective. They accept like 1% of all applicants. It's easier to get into Harvard than to get into Y Combinator. They are really short and intense. It's a 10-week program. And they're basically a seed fund. So they invest in every entrepreneur that comes through the program, about $120,000, and then they help them move to the next round of funding. But in emerging markets, we see that things are different. So first, they're still selective, but there's a smaller applicant pool in emerging markets. It's on average, I think, 130 applicants in high-income countries, and then only 50 in emerging markets. So they're still selective, but there's a smaller pool to choose from. They have typically a slower pace program, so it's longer on average, and they are less likely to offer direct funding, and when they do offer direct funding, they can offer less of it. So in high-income countries, it's on average $200,000 a year. In emerging markets, more like 50. And they're also themselves funded differently. So they're not structured like seed funds. Usually they're funded through government or philanthropy, so grants. So they may have really different incentives and pressures than the Y Combinators of the world have. So I think this is a really helpful first start to understand what an accelerator is in different contexts. But now the question is, do they work? So yes, Y Combinator works for Airbnb, but do emerging market accelerators work for, emerging market startups? So that's when I wanted to get into the really fun stuff, which is our partnership with Emory University, the Entrepreneurship Database Program. So Emory partners with hundreds of accelerator programs all over the world. They collect data on ventures that go through those programs and aggregate it into this big academic data set. They've been collecting data since 2013, and they have data on over 7,000 ventures. Again, I encourage you, if you're interested, to take a look at our website, because you can actually request a download of the data and play with it yourself. You can also filter by the things that matter to you. Like if you really care about women entrepreneurs and women founders, you can filter to understand what's different for teams that are founded by women. So, but in terms of the data itself, the way it works is Emory works with multiple accelerator programs, and they collect standard data at the application level. And then they do follow-up surveys of both accepted and rejected entrepreneurs at, every year. So they collect data for both groups, and they have follow-up data for multiple years. So they can really track every venture as it grows or as it dies, depending on how the venture's doing. And having both accepted and rejected entrepreneurs is really important, because then you can actually start to compare how accelerated ventures are doing compared to their cohorts that did not get accepted. And you can start to answer that question: do accelerators work? And this is the first time I've ever showed this data. It is preliminary, which is why there are no numbers next to those charts. But the answer is yes, accelerators really do work. If we look at 3 of the sort of key metrics that we follow, which is revenue growth, equity raised, and jobs created, we see that the accelerated entrepreneurs, that's that bar in green, do better than the non-accelerated entrepreneurs across the board for all 3 metrics. So especially for revenue, we see that there's a significant difference in revenue growth. That's a 1-year change after application. There's also a significant increase in equity. And then there is also a higher average number of jobs created. However, that is not statistically significant. So it's a sort of a weaker effect there. So this is great news for us, because we think accelerators are doing great work, and now the data is proving that that's true. But entrepreneurs are not all created equal, and neither are accelerator programs. So we really, for this piece of research that we're doing, are trying to understand what are the differences in performance for accelerators that operate in high-income countries versus emerging markets. And what we've found is that that revenue effect is really still significant, that across the board, it's pretty much even. If you're accelerated in the US or in Kenya or in India, the revenue effect is pretty much the same. The differences are really around equity raised. And we also look at debt financing and also grant funding. And so we're trying to explore a little bit what the differences might be there. We think it's probably tied to just the availability of capital in emerging markets, and also perhaps the level of readiness for investment for entrepreneurs that are coming from some of these emerging market countries. So we don't have our full set of results yet, but you can be on the lookout for that in, in May. And if you have any thoughts about what might be driving some of those differences, we'd love to still hear them. So do accelerators work? The answer is yes. But that really doesn't stop our questions. It really just sort of leads to more and more interesting questions. So do different kinds of accelerators work differently? Does the type of entrepreneur impact how they perform? So do women entrepreneurs perform differently from men? What different program elements might lead to different outcomes? So does having a longer program matter more for certain kinds of entrepreneurs, for example? So we're going to be taking a look at some of these other questions in the coming years. I encourage you in your questions, if you have ideas, please tell us, and then come up after and talk about your experience both as an accelerator and also if you're interested in participating, we would love to include your data in this data set. So thank you.
Thank you, Genevieve. That was very interesting, and I have about 1,000 questions, so it's okay. I'll let you guys get a word in as well. So if I could flip over to my presentation, please. As you heard, my name is Dave Moskovitz. I'm the country manager of GEN New Zealand, and I've been involved in running 5 accelerator programs in New Zealand, including several several GovTech Accelerators. And today I'm here to tell you about the GovTech Accelerators that we've run. We're just in our 3rd iteration. We've run 2 over the last 3 years, and we just started our 3rd one very recently. So in this presentation, I'm going to tell you a bit about the New Zealand context, why you might want to accelerate government, what actually comes out of the other end of the program, how it works, and the key things that we've learned. So this is where New Zealand is. If you were to fly a satellite over New Zealand a couple of 1,000 kilometers, this is what you might see. And I mean, you can see a bit of Australia and Papua New Guinea and Indonesia and Antarctica, but you know, there's really quite a lot of water there, and we're really, really isolated from the rest of the world. We're a small country, only 4.5 million people. Government actually plays a fairly large role, excuse me, in the economy at about 40% of GDP. Per capita GDP is around 36,000 US dollars per year. So, we're a fairly typical Western country in that sense, but we're really, really far away from the rest of the world and really self-reliant. Small country, and one of the key things is that people have trust in government. I think that's one of the elements that has made our program so successful, is the degree of trust that people have with government in New Zealand. So I have my own definition of accelerator, because I thought, everyone has their own, and I thought I'd give you mine. Intensive fixed length. So going into an accelerator and being in an accelerator is probably the hardest thing that people going through accelerators have done in their lives. It is really, really hard, super hard. You're working 18-hour days under continual stress, so it is really, really hard work. It's fixed length, and our programs are between 12 and 15 weeks. They take startups to either investable or failure, and the whole idea behind an accelerator is that you want to qualify out some of the startups that come in, as well as qualify in some of the others, and we'll talk about this in a moment. The main program delivery is through mentors or people that are experienced in the vertical or in the craft of entrepreneurship. And we also give our people in our accelerators some experiential education. So this isn't book learning, but this is learning by doing. And these are all critical elements in the accelerator programs that we've run in New Zealand. So just make sure we've got our terminology straight. So why would you want to accelerate government? I mean, it seems like a really odd thing to do, to accelerate government. Well, there are a couple of there's some direct outcomes that you might be working toward. The key outcome of our program, the key thing we're trying to deliver, is to create running private sector companies that solve hard government problems. So why are these problems too hard for government to solve? Is there such a thing as a problem that's too hard for government? Well, there may be problems due to internal politics within or between agencies. There may be problems with the speed of delivery that government can go at due to internal constraints, and we see this typically around IT systems and the IT infrastructure in government. There may be a bunch of other rules that government is subject to that the private sector isn't subject to, which makes sense to apply private sector thinking and private sector techniques to solving government problems. So that's the key thing we're trying to do. Oops. Is to create running private sector companies. We also want to massively shorten the length of time it takes to deliver innovative solutions. So we find that in accelerators, compared to normal government, we can get stuff done in a 12-week program that might take a couple of years to do inside of government. Again, because people are working really long hours, they're using new techniques, and they're much more motivated because they have a direct personal stake in the outcome. We also use it to drive public sector innovation and digital transformation. So we find that when people have been through the program, and if they go back into government, all of a sudden they're armed with a whole bunch of new techniques that they've learned being a startup, like agile, lean, exponential, and so on, that they take back into their government departments. And they're no longer satisfied with sitting in meetings all day and not doing anything. These people just want to get stuff done. And so that is one way to really firmly drive public sector innovation. But we also speed up natural selection. The business world is a jungle, and the fast eat the slow, and the successful companies go off and reproduce and do really interesting things, and the unsuccessful ones die off. And that's okay, because companies may fail due to trying to work on an invalid problem or a problem that is really poorly defined. A startup might fail because it's working in a market that isn't viable. There aren't enough people in that market to provide enough income. The solution may be inappropriate. A startup may come up with something that is not focused on providing a really wonderful customer experience, in which case people just aren't going to use it. Or the solution may be based on bad technology that fails. Or one of the most common sources of a startup failure are poor performing teams. Teams that are squabbling internally, teams that don't have the training, not prepared, and so on. So startups can fail for any of these reasons. But, of course, we want to fast succeed viable projects as well. So that if something is going well, we want to be able to pour petrol on the fires that result and make sure that they've got the resources that they need to really excel quickly. So here's a dirty little secret about what we're doing with GovTech Acceleration. You may remember that adage from the global financial crisis, but we've turned it on its head. And what we're doing is socializing the gains and privatizing the risks of failure. So we're allowing government projects to fail under intense pressure by turning them into little startups. You know what? Startups fail all the time. And if a government project that's been turned into a private sector company startup fails, that's just another startup failure. It happens all the time. 90% of startups fail. On the other hand, if it's super successful, then the government agency can claim credit for actually having worked on this. So it's a win-win situation for government. Some of the indirect outcomes are that we infect government with entrepreneurship and modern methodologies. And as I said, people take this work back to them into government when they've finished our program. We increase resilience and capacity to manage risk within those government agencies. And we provide culture change in and between agencies. Now, the accelerators that we run typically have 4 or 5 different agencies who are working on problems in the accelerator. Strangely enough, these guys talk to each other when they're working 18-hour days in really close conditions, and they hatch little projects together between agencies, and it's really great to see that. But the thing that keeps me coming back again and again into acceleration, and particularly into GovTech Acceleration, is the personal transformation that takes place in the people that are going through the program. Again, as I said, it's probably the hardest thing they've ever done, and they acquire lots of new skills at a rapid rate. They can push their own boundaries and realize their own potential in ways that they never realized possible. And basically, I think they turn into better people in many ways, and the agencies that they work for are also improved through that personal transformation. I find it incredibly rewarding, and that's my main reason for being involved in doing this. Okay, so how does it work? So this slide is actually the crux of my presentation, and I'll explain to you now how the program actually works. So the program begins, it takes about 6 months, and 3 months of that is actually the accelerator program. But there's about 3 months worth of preparation before the program actually starts. And that starts with getting the government agencies involved to enumerate a bunch of problems or opportunities that they would like worked on by these little public-private sector companies that they're going to spin out. So they come up with a really long list of them. We then send those through a selection panel, and we cull quite a lot of them, most of them out, and we end up with a much smaller list of problems that we think are suitable for acceleration. We then take those shortlisted problems, and at the same time, by the way, we're advertising in social media and media to encourage entrepreneurs and public sector employees to come and join this accelerator program. And it hasn't been hard to attract people because it's a really exciting thing to do. We then run a startup weekend type event, which we call the Rev Up Weekend, where these problems are presented by the government agencies that are sponsoring them, and the entrepreneurs and public sector people form teams, and they work on these problems over the course of the weekend. And by the end of the weekend, hopefully some of them will have prototypes or descriptions of how they will go ahead and approach solving that problem. So at the end of that weekend, they present to a panel of judges, and the good ones are invited to put in a formal application to enter the 12-week accelerator program. We then take all of those formal applications to enter the program, and we send those through another selection panel and do our due diligence on the entrepreneurs involved and make sure that they have experience in being able to work on the problem, and cull that list down a little bit more and end up with 8 to 10 teams, which we then send through the 12-week acceleration program. So the 12-week acceleration program is divided into roughly 3 parts. The first part is all about customer and problem discovery. So to make sure that the problem that they're working on is actually a valid problem, and that they can find people who have this problem and know that they have this problem. That whole customer problem discovery issue is the death of many, many startups, of startups working on a problem that people either don't have or don't know that they have. So we want to ensure that all of these entrepreneurs are actually working on real-world problems that people actually have. And they start defining what they're going to do, how they're going to approach things, and how they're going to build their minimum viable product. one of the key things we try to get them to do is sell stuff before they start building anything, right? So this is classic lean startup methodology. Sell somebody something, and then when you can actually sell it to them sight unseen, that's when you know that you have something that's viable, and you can go off and start expending resource on building it. So the second 4 weeks of the program is about building that minimum viable product, or MVP, and iterating it, validating parts of it, and continue to improve it. And the third part of the program is about starting to get ready to pitch that product to a panel on demo day, and to continually refine and increase sales and start to gain traction. The program does end on a demo day event, and in Wellington we hire out the biggest, most beautiful theater. We invite lots of government agencies and private investors, other entrepreneurs from within the startup ecosystem, and it's a big celebration. And all the teams pitch to a panel of a combination of senior government employees and private investors. Most of them will be pitching on demo day either for private investment or for continued government funding so that they can continue to qualify out whatever it is that they're working on. And if they do get funded, either internally by government or externally by private investors, well, they can continue on. And if they don't, well, then they just join that long list of failed startups. And some of them persevere on using their own resources, and others go back to their day jobs. And that's perfectly okay. So these new ventures typically have 3 to 4 people in them from a mixture of the public sector and private sector. They're just normal, ordinary garden variety, limited liability companies under New Zealand law. And the founders of that company are the shareholders of that company, and they own all of the new intellectual property that comes out of the project that they're working on. So this is what government is giving away, saying, look, little company, you go, we've had a go at this, we haven't done that great a job at this, but we would like you to develop this further. And as you saw in that initial map of New Zealand on the world stage, we are so far away from everyone and so small that we know that all the solutions that we try to build in New Zealand should have some sort of global applicability, because in a market of 4.5 million people, it's just really hard to make enough money to provide a living for anyone. So we like to think that we can scale all of these startups into international ventures, and that's how the new intellectual property gets deployed. So the private sector people who are part of the program get subsistence funding or ramen funding. I think they get $20,000 for the 12 weeks of the program, New Zealand dollars. So no one's going to get rich off this, but you're not going to starve either. And the public sector participants are on secondment from their agencies, so they receive the same salaries that they would normally get from the government agencies that they work for. So in terms of planning for success of this sort of a program, there are a few things to remember. And government can't do this by itself. To run a good acceleration program really requires quite a lot of private sector thinking and private sector methodologies. And so governments really need to partner with private sector entities in order to make this sort of thing successful. There's quite a lot of external comms and marketing involved to try to attract the right people into the program to make the program successful. And you need to remember that this is startup investment, so some things are going to fail, and you have to be prepared for that. But remember, that's all firewalled off. It's not the government failing, it's these little private sector companies failing. But you do need to ensure that there's follow-on funding available. So in one of my hats on, I do invest in startups. And whenever I invest in a startup, I try to ensure that I have at least as much money set aside for that startup for follow-on investment, because sure enough, in the startup world, everything takes twice as long and is 3 times as hard as you initially suspected it would be. And so after that initial investment, typically you're going to need a little bit more investment. So you need to make sure that there's some sort of follow-on funding available. It's really good to establish some fast-track procurement rules. And the rules that we have in New Zealand are that when these startups are incorporated and when they enter the program, they are able to sell the government $50,000, 50,000 New Zealand dollars, it's about 35,000 US, 50,000 New Zealand dollars worth of goods before they have to go through the standard public tender request for proposal process. So they do have to go through the standard procurement procedures, but only after they reach a certain threshold. So that enables them to sort of get that first bit of business through the door before they need to go through the rather painstakingly long and arduous government procurement procedures. So the thing here is we don't want to accelerate them into a brick wall, because it's not hard to do that if you don't provide the resources and other elements on the back end of the program, and you just finish things on demo day. So you need to have some sort of follow-up program available. So I'll just take you through a few of the sample ventures that have come through the program. The first one is called Two Shakes, and please no New Zealand sheep jokes here. Two Shakes is a company that was set up to provide authority to act for businesses acting on behalf of other businesses. So if I'm a business, I want my accountant to be able to file tax returns for me. I want my bookkeeper to be able to file basic paperwork with government. And I want my HR people that I've outsourced to be able to file things to the employment service and stuff like that. So there's no centralized authority to act, or there wasn't any centralized authority to act before Two Shakes came along, and they set up a blockchain-based authentication system, a standard RegTech, to allow companies to act on behalf of other companies when interfacing with government. They've been very successful and have closed deals with quite a few business service providers as well as government agencies. Another one of these startups is CoHelix, and what they do is make signing on new employees really simple. So back in the bad old days, when you wanted to bring on an employee, especially if they were a seasonal worker, you would have to file forms with the Employment Service, with the Inland Revenue Department, and with several other agencies. And what CoHelix have taken all of that data and centralized it onto one form, which employers can use. And for a very small fee, it files all of the required paperwork off to all of the government agencies involved. Fairly simplistic, works really well. Vizard's mission in life was to make applying for visas a lot easier. So, and this is specifically aimed at the Chinese tourist market into New Zealand in the first instance. So if you're a Chinese tourist and you want to come to New Zealand on a visitor visa, you need to gather quite a lot of information and paperwork and then send it off to Beijing and wait for it to get posted back to you. So these guys have essentially put all of that online, and they're already selling the solution to other countries outside of both China and New Zealand. So those are 3 examples of companies that have been through the GovTech Accelerators. So here's some of the learnings. First off, self-disruption can be challenging, right? When you disrupt yourself, it can be painful. But you have to remember, if you don't disrupt yourself, then it's likely that someone else is going to come along and disrupt you at some later stage in the future. So it's a journey. Is everyone on board? It really pays to have support from as high a level as possible within government before you embark on a program like this. But clear accountability and clear boundaries really help people define how things are going to work. And you also need to ensure that the opportunities or problems are set well, because really ill-stated opportunities will make for problems later on in the process. Make sure that you're really clear about what needs to happen and what the problem that you're trying to solve is. Be lean about the ventures and be lean about the programs. I mean, the lean startup methodology is based on the build, measure, learn cycle. So as you're going through your own program, be sure that you're always measuring and learning from what you're doing and always feeding those learnings back into the cycle. So identify and test hypothesis. Start with a minimum viable program and minimum viable product and see what works, and then kill what doesn't, because you can't afford to expend a lot of resource on things that aren't working out well. So, in summary, it's all about the people. There's a Maori proverb which says, he aha te mea nui o te ao, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. What is the most important thing in the world? It is people, it is people, it is people. And it is all about people in an acceleration program as well. And their commitment to the program and their commitment to solving the problem for government that they're working on, because building startups is really hard. But with the right sort of acceleration techniques, we can bring the best of both worlds, public and private sector, together and solve problems hand in hand with government. So here's a graduating class from last year's R9 Accelerator. And I'd love to talk to you about this if you're interested in learning more or considering setting up a similar program in your own country. Let me know. Come and talk to me. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much. And I would now like to invite Wael to the stage and tell us about the Supply Chain Accelerator.
Thank you.
In Cairo.
Presentation. Anyways, hello. I'm Wael. I'm from Egypt. I'm the head of Entrepreneurship Center at the university called Arab Academy for Science, Technology, and Maritime Transport. Actually, we're one of the top 2 universities in the country, and we're not private and we're not a public university. I just want to give you a very quick introduction about our university in a couple of minutes. We're the Arab League educational organization. I mean, we have a sort of diplomatic kind of identity. We're at the education arm of the Arab League. The Arab League is somehow like European Union and the Arab League that connects Arab countries. So we're the official educational arm of this. The green one is not working. Green, yes. We have several campuses in Egypt and outside Egypt. We have in Cairo and Alexandria and Port Said and Aswan, which enables us to have a great impact of the Egyptian entrepreneurship ecosystem. And we're launching a new branch in Emirates this year. So, I mean, we're quite, we have a quite outreach. We used to be specialized in maritime education and maritime. We used to be the only maritime university in the region, actually. And then we expanded to engineering, business, logistics, media, and other disciplines, and different sectors, undergrad and postgraduate. We were awarded last year a University of the Year in entrepreneurship. 3 days ago, we had the Egypt Entrepreneurship Forum. It was in Alexandria and in Cairo, where we had several programs, including a roundtable discussion experts meeting on incubators and accelerators, best practices, just to share thoughts, the best global practices, and that works out with the Egyptian and acceleration trends in general. We had experts from the United States, from Thailand, from Indonesia, from Mexico, from South Africa. It was very inspiring and very insightful, actually. And the closing, we had the entrepreneurship rally. I mentioned this because the rally is our entrepreneurship competition, which is the first milestone of the accelerator that should be feeding the accelerator afterwards. Definitely we deal with students. Anyone here deal with students? Somehow you're connected with students in universities? Okay, so quite many. Interesting. For those who deal with students, you know that students are different when it comes to entrepreneurship and startups in terms of the program that works out with students, in terms of the level of commitment, in terms of the percentage of ideas that turns into real business. It's quite different. That's why we have programs for the students and different programs for non-students. And for students, we have virtual incubation programs and other programs, but for non-students, we focus on the supply chain entrepreneurship. And this is the main reason why you have Supply Chain Accelerator. If I may ask you, how many of you work on somehow technology entrepreneurship, tech-based startups, technology accelerator or incubator or something? Oh, very few, like 20%. And others? Other sectors? Interesting. Because usually, the case is 80 to 90% of the ecosystem works on tech-based startups. And as a matter of fact, technology is extremely important, but technology is an enabler, is not an objective. Technology is is not, I should not focus on having a tech-based startups because it is an enabler. In my country, for example, and many other countries, to scale up a mobile application or a website or any tech-based startup is very difficult to scale up, and to be one of the unicorns is quite difficult. That's why we have a lot of sectors and industries that are left behind, where we have hundreds of business opportunities, and everyone in the ecosystem focusing on technology. This is the case in my country, and I guess it's the case in other countries. That's why we decided to focus on a sector that has a high potential, and it's extremely important. Because supply chain and logistics is an enabler to everything almost. Supply chain works out with transportation, it works out with export and import, it works out with tourism, it works out with agriculture. Supply chain and logistics are extremely important to every single sector that you might think of. And it's an enabler thing. It can be technology, it can be non-technology, but at the end of the day, the scope of impact of supply chain startups is extremely important to many sectors and industries. Why we selected supply chain? Because at the end of the day, it's one of the economics rules in economics, the comparative advantage. I should base my business, if I am a country or if I am an organization or whatever, I should be specialized in things that I have a distinctive competency in, or I have a strength, or I have a competitive advantage as a marketing terminology. And as the only specialized educational organization in logistics management and supply chain in the Middle East, we thought it would be a good opportunity. We have the network, we have the ecosystem, we have the network of mentors, of trainers, of consultants, of exposure to industry, of international and local experts in the field of supply chain and logistics management. That's why we decided to have or to focus on this specialty based on a competency that we have. Actually, we're launching the Supply Chain Accelerator. We don't have yet any startups to share, but on top of the components of any accelerator when it comes to business counseling or coaching or filtration or selection of business ideas, we have two main components that we think are extremely important. One of them is marketing research, because based on what we've seen, most of startups are product-oriented. They focus on the product, they focus on the technology, they focus on the development of what they have, but they don't really focus on market. They don't focus on customer, as you said. Usually they focus on product development. And this does not work out in business. In business, the most important is the customer, as Dave said. So we have a marketing research capability that helps startups to be aware of what kind of product works out with what kind of market segment. Pricing strategy, how to price what, it depends on, even in the brand name selection and everything, because they usually lack data and they don't have the capability, either financial or non-financial capability, to do their own homework when it comes to marketing research, when it comes to research in general. The second component is profiling. You said people, and people. It has to do with people. Entrepreneurship has to do with people at the end of the day. It's not a big enterprise. It's not a huge organization. They don't have millions. They cannot recruit consultants, but they have this team. And in some cases, it's a big challenge for them to select the right co-founder and to have to match the team dynamics. They have a big challenge in the team dynamics. In some of the cases, most of the team are technical background, or they are ideators. They just have very smart ideas and very nice ideas and very creative ideas, but no one works in the operation side of it. No one works in the business development side of it. So one of the key services that we work on is personality assessment and profiling to help our startups advice, what kind of role you have in this company, and do you need a partner? Because in many of the cases, they come as team of 3 or 4 persons, and when it comes to scalability and when they scale up, they have big problems in sharing equity because the level of efforts is not the same, and they did not expect to get up to this level. That's why this is one of the key components we work on. Do you need a co-founder? Do you need a partner? What kind of partner? What kind of co-founder? Is it part of the team? Is this the ideal team combination, or you need to change your team somehow? Finally, we plan for an international boot camp in supply chain entrepreneurship this summer, starting July. It's an international activity. It's part of, it's an entrepreneurship training, visiting Egypt, go to the pyramids, enjoy the 2 weeks there, and have a specialized hands-on experience on supply chain and logistics management. So this is for me, and thank you very much. Thank you.
Hello? Yeah, it's working. Good afternoon, everyone. How are you doing? Can I ask you to do one super silly thing with me? Just to wake up a little bit. Can we all stand up? Please? Come on. I know it was a lot of information to digest, so just let's jump as high as possible, okay? I'm doing this too. Come on. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Okay, sounds good. Take a seat. Thank you. I suspect that many of you asking question what the World Bank has to do with startup acceleration. And it is a relevant question, but I will try to explain you just a little bit why we are doing what we are doing, and to share with you some of the insights that we have from doing a research on different acceleration programs in sub-Saharan Africa specifically, and the pilots on promoting acceleration program as a service with our business incubators, partner business incubators in Senegal, Kenya, and South Africa. I hope that it will be interesting for you, and I will be happy to answer questions later. But let's start a little bit again. Who am I, why I'm here, and again, what we are doing with our entrepreneurs. So I don't want to give you like big, long overview of the World Bank, but I'm representing Innovation and Entrepreneurship Unit. And our objective within the big organization as a World Bank is to think about how innovation and entrepreneurship can help to solve 2 strategic goals of the World Bank, which is reduce poverty and increase shared prosperity, which means inclusion. I should admit that we are not super traditional World Bank unit. We kind of internal think tank with main objective to develop knowledge, to pilot kind of new projects with our partners, with our donors, assess the outcomes, and try to scale up through big operations with our other partners. So it's a little bit different approach, and that's why we have a luxury and privilege to work directly with the entrepreneurs and business accelerators and incubators, rather than just with the governments and policy institutions. These are the main kind of sectors that we are focusing on, but the common denominator is entrepreneur. We are working and trying to target, support growth entrepreneurs across different sectors with 2 priority sectors in climate, mobile, digital, and agribusiness, because we think this is the most promising and disruptive sectors with high impact. And across all these sectors, we're also trying to empower women entrepreneurs and to develop kind of mechanism to involve underserved population in these programs. I think the best way to describe why we are doing what we are doing, again, is through our entrepreneurs. Who is from Kenya here? Okay, do you know this lovely lady? No? Okay, this is Catherine Mahugu. She's an amazing mobile entrepreneur, and she developed a mobile to web application that links underserved, underbanked art crafters, jewelers, to the international buyers. She started, I think, almost 6 years ago, and we have honored to help her in the beginning through NILab and Mobile Star Bootcamp. And now her platform, which is Shop Soko, please check it out, it's amazing. Her jewelry is sold in Nordstrom in US. Giselle Bunchen is wearing one of the products that Kenyan craftsmen developed and selling on this website. So this is the reason why we are doing what we are doing. We want to help to identify these entrepreneurs, to see what they need, and how we can help them to grow on the international level. Our digital entrepreneurship program, and why I'm focusing on this one, because the acceleration programs that they will be doing for the next 2 years are mostly focused on the digital entrepreneurs. It's a complex program, there is a different components, but again, what I want to focus on is the acceleration part. Back in 2009, we started our kind of mobile program by establishing several mobile incubators, so-called M-Labs. My colleagues from Senegal are here. They were one of the first mobile lab in Africa, so if you want to talk to them later, they have amazing stories to tell. And after working with them for a while, we decided, okay, why we need to help them more? What is the issue? And we see that the level of the entrepreneurs that they were serving was still very early stage. They were nice ideas, nice guys with a lot of potential, but there were not that many high growth potential entrepreneurs, as we call it. And we tried to understand what's going on, and before designing our project, we decided also to understand what's going on with other acceleration programs with Sub-Saharan Africa. So we partnered with ANDE, our good colleagues, and Emory University, and Include, which is a Dutch-based consulting company, to evaluate not the entrepreneurs, but the business model of different acceleration programs in Sub-Saharan Africa. There were kind of 3 components. We wanted to understand how they work, on like more general assessment. We wanted to create 8 kind of case studies with much more information and details. And also we wanted to understand what is the impact of these programs on their entrepreneurs. The last part is still in progress, so the data will feed into the general Gallery database and will be available maybe in a year. But what we were able to achieve is to evaluate 24 programs. We started with 200 actually. Then we decided to understand how much of these 200 with the name acceleration actually has some aspects of acceleration programs. And to be honest, in the end of the day, we come up with 41 programs, and from which 24 answered our questions and participated, 24 from 11 countries. And what we learned, one important thing, we also tried to compare the acceleration program in very nascent entrepreneurship ecosystems and more developed, mature entrepreneurship ecosystems. And the outcomes, while very interesting, actually help us to understand the key challenges to address. And this is a couple of things that I wanted to mention. Only 35 of the programs have very specific process on selecting the entrepreneurs. And we all know that the selection of entrepreneurs, selection of right entrepreneurs is one of the critical aspects of success for acceleration program. Only 38% of this actually provides some kind of access to finance. And to be honest, even out of this 38%, I think half was grant money, not the actual investment money or linkages with the investors. 63% of these programs were donor or government funded, which again, it's not a bad thing, but it's impacts on the model how these programs operate. And I think, Genevieve, you mentioned about it as well. And over 53% of these programs have only one mentor available for participants. And this is, I think, very important gaps that we observed. And they informed our design for the programs that I will describe you in a second. This is some more key information, and I will be happy to share. The report will be available for public in May. I don't want really to kind of get into the details, but if you are interested, I will be happy to give you more details. But again, what we decided is to focus on 3 main levels of how we want to support acceleration efforts in sub-Saharan Africa. How we create a way to aggregate entrepreneurs through first large initiative, through process, and to identify 20 stars potential. I don't like this word, I'm sorry for using this, but really 20 promising teams that we can put in front of the international investors and international mentors. How we can identify people whom we can make visible on the international scale. So that's how we are going to do it. At first, we will start with the regional acceleration programs that we are doing with our partners in Senegal and Kenya. Senegal is responsible for West African region, and Kenya is doing East Africa regional program. Again, the idea to identify up to 40 entrepreneurs through 2 cohorts and walk them through 6 months program with virtual and online, virtual and face-to-face mentorship programs with potential demo day in the end and linkages with the investors. The idea is that the cream of the crop will fit into Pan-African acceleration program, which is even more strict selective process aimed to identify 20 entrepreneurs. And the program will be much longer. They will have 2-week residential program here in South Africa, actually, in November. And we are bringing international investors and mentors for them to facilitate these linkages. The regional acceleration programs, they already launched. We just finished the application process, and the selection of the participants will be done in April. The launch of the Pan-African Acceleration Program will be done in April, most likely, and the first outcome will be again now in November, December of this year. This is it from my side. Thank you very much for your attention, and welcome to the Q&A, I guess.
Right, well, thank you to all the speakers for really interesting presentations. I know I have a lot of questions, and I'm sure the people in the audience have some questions too. So there are a couple of mics that are going to be floating around. Over here.
Hello? Yeah, I have a question about the data. You analyze the people that are applying for accelerators. But of course, the accelerators select the best ones. So it's a little bit logical that the other ones are less good. Did you also look at people that don't apply? Because I'm doubting the concept of accelerator, because I think a lot of entrepreneurs that are already good don't apply for accelerator because they have to give up 80% or 6% of their equity. So I'm doubting the model of acceleration in the long term, depending on what you look at, of course, because if you're looking at inspiring people and etc. But I'm doubting if real entrepreneurs would do an accelerator, because I would never give up 8% for a 3-month course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
To be critical, sorry, I can be a little bit critical.
That's a great question. So on the selection component, like Sophia mentioned, selection is a key value add that accelerators provide. And one way that we can address that is we can look at entrepreneurs that were selected but then did not actually attend. They decided that acceleration wasn't for them. So we've been tracking that, but it's usually like 1 per cohort. So right now we have something like 20 entrepreneurs that fit that criteria. So it just takes a little bit more time for us to get the data. And about the equity, actually most of the, or so many of the accelerators that we studied in our survey don't take an equity stake. But I think that's an interesting thing to look at, is sort of the decision-making factor.
That's maybe a good one, because I think not equity-based accelerator and an equity-based, I followed a non-equity-based accelerator, because that's perfect. You just get a lot of value. But if you give equity, it's a totally different relationship with your accelerators.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you want to say something?
Just to add to this, I think in our experience also, one of the reasons why there is such a small percentage of acceleration programs, especially in developing countries taking equity, is the issue of trust still between entrepreneurs and investors, and actually just absence of the investment kind of experience or angel investors who will help accelerators to do so. So it's not only kind of, I don't want to do it, it's just sometimes I just can't do or I don't know how to do it, unfortunately, yeah.
If I can add in from the New Zealand accelerator experience, I think it depends on how rich your investment ecosystem is as to whether or not you can afford to not give away that small amount of equity for the training that you're going to get, for the networks that you're going to have access to, and for the follow-on investment from the people who've invested in the accelerator as they want to see your ventures grow. So I would say in a very well-developed investment ecosystem, yeah, it doesn't make much sense. But in one that isn't quite so well developed, it can be a really good decision.
Hello, I'm Yazi from Niger. Hello, I'm Yazi from Niger. Thank you for all that you have shared. And I just started an accelerator program in Niger after 15 years of training people. We have one gap, which is the investment side. We do everything we do in Creative HQ in New Zealand. So what the World Bank do to just fill the gap of investment versus the grant?
It's a good question. So I think one, I can't speak for the whole World Bank. Let me speak from our perspective. What we are trying to do is to, in parallel to our work with the entrepreneurs, we are trying to work with the early stage financiers in the countries where we are working. For example, in the Caribbean, where we have big innovation and entrepreneurship program, our team basically facilitated the development of first 3 angel networks in the region. And we did it just by, it was like, it took us 2 years, to be completely honest, and a lot of legwork, but we were able to identify people, local kind of potential investors who were willing to invest, but they were disorganized. They didn't know how to kind of facilitate deal flow, how to do due diligence, etc. So the idea was how we can help them to fill this gap. But basically, they are doing investments, not us. It's not our objective, right? But we help them to organize, and actually, they did first 5 investments last year. So this is one way how we can support by working with the ecosystem, not just one stakeholder, right? Just an example, yeah.
Okay, there's some people down here.
Hi, my name is Lerato. I'm here, over here.
No? Where?
There's commitment by our provincial government to focus investment on township economy. They call it the township revitalization economy. I would like to know how well do the accelerator programs understand the economics and the environment in which the township businesses operate, and how do they reach, or rather how are they designed to reach the targeted groups, and how do we also ensure, how do we manage the attrition rates, given that a lot of businesses that operate in the townships are informal in their nature. So I'd like to understand those 2 questions, please.
I can start with that one. I would say that we're seeing more and more accelerators specialize. And I haven't seen accelerators that focus on townships specifically. I'm just not as familiar with the South Africa context. But there are a lot that do focus on working with base of the pyramid clients. And usually it's thinking about a specific issue area, like it might be access to water, access to finance. So usually it's thinking about entrepreneurs that are serving folks that might live in townships as clients, working with entrepreneurs who might be coming from the base of the pyramid themselves. I think there's a challenge in the shift of mindset from a sort of self-sustaining enterprise, something that you do because you can't find a job, to an opportunity enterprise, something that you have the desire to really grow and build into something bigger. And it's those second stage of entrepreneurs that accelerators can really support. And it might be that there's a different kind of support that's needed if you're more a micro enterprise. And that transition from micro enterprise to larger business, I think, is not an easy one to make. And a lot of studies have shown that there is not much incentive to formalize your business if you're a micro entrepreneur, sort of operating under the radar, not paying taxes. And so creating the policy environment and incentives where if you have the ambition to grow, there's a reason to actually formalize your business instead of having a bunch of small micro enterprises, I think is a big challenge for a city as a whole to take on. So that's one where the entrepreneurial ecosystem, I think, is really critical.
Actually, sorry, just a comment. I think first thing that you should ask also, if acceleration is the right instrument to help these people, first and foremost. We tend to go, with the trends, but sometimes to be effective, you need to understand what these people really need, and acceleration might not be the answer. I know that there is an amazing example of working with township in South Africa, our labs. And they are doing an amazing job of involving people from townships in the entrepreneurship and basic technical skill training, computer literacy. And only after that, they help them with kind of launching their businesses. So I think the most critical issue is to, first of all, understand what instrument is right. Acceleration is not necessarily the answer.
Amanda, to David, you cover right here, front. GovTech. I think the first question we'd ask from a South African perspective is how do you break down the silos? A lot of government agencies don't communicate to each other at all in the context of government South Africa. So what were the strategies that you implemented in New Zealand that could potentially be implemented here in South Africa in terms of breaking down bad communication, lack of communication amongst the departments to bring on such an acceleration program? Because we do have GovTech in the sense of technology, where government goes technology-wise in terms of services and service delivery, but there is no communication between CETA and the health department or in terms of finding needs. And now you have entrepreneurs that actually develop apps or platforms that could be of benefit both for Department of Health or for CETA. So what were the strategies that you utilized?
So when we set up the program, excuse me, it was set up with a number of agencies all contributing to that program. Some of these agencies were semi-related to each other, and a number of them were not. But we found that by bringing these agencies together, they had this common interest, which was the acceleration program, and they had a common group of people who were the people in the acceleration program, and all of this was being run off-site in a private sector co-working space, which was completely separate from government. We found that by removing those groups of people into a new environment where it was very high pressure and they had to work together and they were learning together and eating together and, and sweating together through everything that they were doing, that the people from those agencies that were actually in the program formed a de facto bridge between those agencies. And so the interactions between those agencies at a very low level happened between the individuals working in the program. So once some of these individuals went back into their day jobs, they would continue keeping up contact with the other agencies. And as these people grew through their, in their careers and worked themselves up through the food chain, they were much more open to working with other agencies who had common interests. So it's a slow, organic thing. I mean, it's not like we waved a magic wand and all of a sudden, poof, everyone was sort of working together and very happy together. It happened by working with people at the grassroots, forging these relationships, and then expanding those as time went on.
Looks like he's got the mic.
Okay. Hi, this is David from Taiwan. I would like to ask the panel is how to move from a good accelerator to an amazing accelerator in terms of what are the key measurement index and also what are the key ingredients to make a good training, a good demo day. Because now a lot of incubator or core space are doing demo day and network. So the question is the key measurements and what are the ingredients to make these activities moving from a good accelerator to an amazing rockstar accelerator.
We have straightforward answer, then everyone would be a great accelerator. Just a couple of thoughts. I mean, first and foremost indicator is your impact on your entrepreneurs. Are you able to make a significant difference in their growth, in their revenues, in their product, and their networks, right? So this is key measure. In terms of moving from good to amazing, there is no recipe, I'm sorry. At least I don't know about any of it, because all these programs, all programs that are working with early stage entrepreneurs are so much contextualized. So it's really, what is amazing in Taiwan is not necessarily amazing in Armenia, my home country, or vice versa, because we are working in different entrepreneurship ecosystems. So if you are asking for a blueprint, there is none, I'm afraid.
And I would add, I would say take a look at our website to see the way that we understand venture performance. That's how we understand whether an accelerator is successful. Did they grow revenue? Did they receive investment? Have they created jobs? Those are sort of the three things that we look at. And then I think there's a report that came out last year on Village Capital, and it looked at, so they're a large organization that run lots of accelerators, and we looked at data from a bunch of different programs to help them understand which programs really did well and which programs did not do really well. What's nice is that it was one organization, so everything was pretty standard in the way they ran their process. And from there, what came out is that really, like David said, people are really key. So if you get the right mentors in the room with the right entrepreneurs, lots of good stuff can happen. But if there's a mismatch, it's not going to go so well. So it's selecting really well, and then it's making sure you have the right partners. Because the program facilitators themselves should just really, I think, match make and then get out of the way and let the entrepreneurs and the mentors do what works.
So if I can just add to that, I mean, when you say good and amazing, it is contextual. Good and amazing to one person are going to mean something completely different to someone else. There are some commonalities, though, and I never thought I'd be sitting up on a stage saying this to a group of people. But I think a lot of it comes down to brand and what sort of brand you can develop. Because if you can develop really good deal flow into the accelerator, if you have a really large, highly qualified, excellent pool of ventures to select from going into the accelerator, that's going to make a huge difference to what comes out the other side. The brand will also mean that you can attract the top mentors that they'll be racing to work in your program so that they have access to the entrepreneurs that are working in the program, and the same thing with investors. And the converse is true as well. If you don't have a very good selection pool and you don't have a good brand, then it's really going to be an uphill battle.
Thanks so much.
Hi, I'm Michel from the Democratic Republic of Congo. I run a small company, and we are basically doing, what we do is supporting SMEs through, first of all, training, trying to channel access to finance, and also a little bit of networking event. I was really interested by the pitch that Sophia, I think, made about Accelerator, and you mentioned Kenya and Senegal. Unfortunately, DRC is not as sexy as Kenya or as Senegal, but just a direct question to you. For a country like ours, close to Kenya, but at the same time Francophone, can we be oriented towards one of those hubs and then develop something with them? Thank you.
I'm very tempted to redirect this question to Sitik Dakar, who just in front of you, but I'm sure we can take it on offline. If you don't mind, I will introduce to my Senegalese colleagues and we will discuss it offline, okay?
Can I jump in? Oh, go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I have a question to the GovTech person, Dave from New Zealand. You mentioned fast-track procurement. I'm very interested in that because I work with Startup Jamaica, one of the accelerators in the Caribbean that Sophia spoke of. We did see the deal flow from the investor side and a lot of excited venture capitalists. But we also see government procurement taking a long time, and we'd like to be able to get some ideas on how you get that fast-track procurement in place for not just services for the entrepreneurs, but mentors into the program, consultants, that kind of thing. How do you suggest we deal with that?
So I have a confession to make.
Go ahead.
The first year we ran this program, we did not have fast-track procurement,
Okay.
and it caused big problems for the startups coming out the other end, because when they finished the program, they were ready to go, they had their products ready, and all of a sudden they had to go through a 6-month procurement cycle in order to sell to government. Problem is that they didn't have any other business and any other income to tide them over during that period. And so a couple of them failed while they were waiting to go through the procurement process. So in the second year we ran this program, we made sure, luckily one of the agencies that we were working with to run the program is the same agency, the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, that runs all of government procurement. So I went to them and said, hey, you guys are running this program, or helping run the GovTech Acceleration program. Wouldn't it be nice if you could set up some procurement exemptions for the startups coming out of this program? We're not asking for big exemptions, and it's not like anyone's going to be able to rort the system or steal from government with a $50,000 exemption, one-time exemption, just for these 9 companies that are coming through the Accelerator program. So I guess we had the luck that the same organization that was controlling procurement was also helping fund part of the Accelerator program. So it was in their interests. But it's hard, and I think particularly in very siloed governments, convincing them to sort of break the rules or bend the rules a little bit would be a lot harder. That said, I think the pressure for digital transformation and government innovation is very, very high in all governments. And if they're seen to being the barrier, the procurement people are being seen to be the barrier to the government innovating or to digital transformation. If you can get things up to the ministerial level, then generally you can get some joy, which is why it's also important to have buy-in from as high up in the government food chain as you can. So another interesting thing, the first iteration of the program we ran, there were no government ministers that were interested in what we were doing at all. They didn't want to know. However, by the middle of the second program, they were really super interested. And by demo day of the second year, we had 4 government ministers all falling over themselves to be in front of the crowd on demo day, because it was getting a lot of press, and and people could see that exciting things were happening. The third time around, it's really easy. We have government backing from the top level now. So it's not quick. These things take time, and they're hard.
Okay. Talking about accelerator teams, and there's a lot of people here that run incubators / accelerators, whatever. And I think Genevieve, you said, really just play matchmaker and then get out of the way and let the magic happen. If you're putting together one, or if you're leading one, or if you're currently on one, what should you look for in an accelerator or incubator team? And should some of us look for different careers if we're actually prohibiting the process, or start to look at different skills on the teams that we're on, or if we're leading one, recruiting the right kind of people? I know there's several incubators or accelerators that those teams need accelerating themselves to actually deliver the impact. So, yeah, I'll quit waffling, but I'm sure you already have a lot of thoughts around that.
That's a really interesting question. And actually, talent and talent development is something that at Andy we see as an issue for the sector, both for intermediaries, so like the incubators, accelerators, and then also for the entrepreneurs who they're accelerating. It works on both levels. I think finding the right people to work in this sector where you might not be getting paid as much as you would if you're working for a large corporate can be really challenging. So recruiting and retaining top talent is a priority for anybody, I think, in the room. For accelerators and incubators, I think that as they grow, what I've seen is that there's typically that matchmaking skill is really important. So people who have really broad networks, because the quality of the network for the accelerator is, I think it really helps drive their success. So, hiring people who perhaps already have connections or who just love going to happy hours and meeting people. And when you talk to them, all you want to do is work with them because they're so fun. I mean, that's actually a really big asset for any team. And so I would say that is true on one hand. On the other hand, I think that branding is really important, and part of branding is usually bringing in big corporate sponsors. Accelerators and corporates are working together more and more. It's not just the corporate accelerators themselves. So I think it's also that business development strategic partnership role can be really important. And what a lot of our members have found is that some of those financial skills that are so important, some of the financial modeling and really understanding cash flow and the more curriculum-focused skills can be outsourced to mentors who have deep expertise, maybe because they run a VC fund, and that it's less important on the team itself. But my colleague Lisa is actually in the room, and I think she is. And so if you're interested in talent generally at Andy, come and talk to us. We're also interested in that.
My name is Hebron Rapper. I'm from Boston House. I'm also an active participant in small business development from the city of Ekurhuleni and the Netcock, but my question is directed to Sarah. But before I actually get onto the question, I'm gonna have to really commend you on a well put together presentation that is inclusive of women entrepreneurship, given the fact that most of the women in business are not really given the much needed attention they require for their business to actually develop and grow. You mentioned investment equity incubator programs, and you also mentioned the fact that the reason why you have not actually been able to implement the investment equity incubator program, it's simply because of the trust deficit between the entrepreneurs and also the angel investors who have an interest to invest into these businesses. But however, you also mentioned that you don't know how to go on about implementing this program. And I think by saying that, you're actually saying that you actually need a bit of assistance from the people in business that require, equity investment. So how would you then therefore like the people in business that require equity investment into their businesses to actually assist you in developing a successful equity investment incubator program?
Thank you for offering help. Much appreciated. First of all, I should say, I think what we are trying to do while implementing our programs, the private sector is our kind of equal partner. And I'm not sure what you referred to when you said that we don't know how to implement programs, but while we are working with our incubators and our partners on the ground, we are working directly with the entrepreneurs and other ecosystem stakeholders to design our programs. So if you feel that you can contribute, feel free to contact me and suggest what you have in mind. Yeah, we're always open to listen.
I'm not working. Hi. I'm not going to say anything new. I'm just really thrilled that there is actually a platform for creative startups, because it's always been quite tech-led and also not the sort of thing that would appeal or at least have any work to do with what I'm doing, which is sort of the craft scene. So I'm looking to create an app that's going to be solving a problem I found. I'm originally from South Africa and had a shop in London, and I found that I had major issues with my supply chain between the crafters and the work that we're trying to give them. So I really just want to say I'm really pleased that this exists, that somebody else has done it in some fashion. So, because it puts in my mind the fact that it can be done. Since I've been back, I've been hearing a lot of, but you can't work with those type of women, they're not tech ready. So I'm really interested in hearing about this program you were talking about with the Kenyan lady. And that's pretty much all I've got to say.
Again, you can visit the website that will be in my presentation. There is a case study on the shop Soko, and you can visit their website. There's a lot of information about it, because she is now like really prominent Kenyan entrepreneur, and her model, I think it's totally scalable and applicable across the continent. So just basically Google it. You will get a lot of information.
And how do we join that program? So if I wanted to be considered as part of in that space, how would I be able to join that program?
If there is a ongoing program that is open for entrepreneurs, you can apply, and it's a selective process, so you should be aware that it's always merit-based.
Yeah, fair enough.
So the more information, again, you can find on our website, but if you can just contact me, I will give you more info about the current opportunities.
Okay, thank you.
Can I speak? I'm Janet Landy. I'm from Skills Village, looking to convert into an accelerator, and I'm really a good follow-on from the previous speaker. When you work with a lot of creative people, we work in the event industry, and we've got a model around doing events on about the Sustainable Development Goals. And you need about 50 different suppliers for an event. And one of the challenges is, especially with the creative suppliers, is that we haven't all got those skills in terms of the accounting skills, the financial, the human resources, etc. We formed a secondary cooperative 5 years ago to try and be that head office for us. And one of the things that we found is it's very difficult to do your admin, to do your finance, to do your procurement. So effectively that then got registered on our government database so that we would be able to work with primary cooperatives as entrepreneurs who would then not have to go through all of that work. I know myself personally that I'm useless at the finance side, and effectively you've got to be able to say, can you not work with experts who are doing all of that, almost like outsourcing to a mentor, but to have a shared space, shared resources where everybody can come to in terms of entrepreneurs, and you do what you're best at, whether it's crafting or whether it's woodwork or pottery or whatever. What is your feeling on a cooperative model with a cooperative financial institute behind you that can actually make sure that that money is managed and you are then releasing it when people have done it? Because not all entrepreneurs are are large. We've got many who are not as strong, but can make beautiful product in the value chain. So it's maximizing the multiplier effect. And just the last one is, if you have a laundry that is washing the linen that was hired for an event, they haven't got time to be doing all of that paperwork, but somebody else does the admin, submits it, they get paid, and they can continue. So it's not quite entrepreneurial, but the bottom line is it creates that value chain in the big field.
Sounds like a great idea. If you can pull the funding together, let's have a go.
Good. I'm going to call you to come and visit us. Excellent. Thanks.
Well, I think that's probably all we have time for at the moment.
I have a question here, please, if you don't mind.
One last question.
All right, thanks a lot. A question for the World Bank. With regards to your pilots in Senegal and other areas, is it possible that that could also be considered for South Africa, because we've got, we are for one in accelerator company, and we believe that it will be good for us to actually collaborate with a program of that nature for South Africa, and we just wanted to find out if we could plug into that one. The second question regarding the logistics. In the acceleration program, in the country, are there other verticals that are being serviced? Because we found here in South Africa that the SMMEs, they come from all walks of life, and therefore you can't just be specific with one vertical. You will have to go through and create some capability in various other verticals. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, for the supply chain, it's not. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I think so. Yes. It's not a vertical on its own. It's a sector, and we have several verticals under the supply chain. For example, we've been through export entrepreneurship competition. This was like 3 months ago, and utilizing supply chain and logistics to enable export. So every time we pick a vertical under the supply chain, so once we have export enabling startups that are based on supply chain and logistics, another time we have a second vertical that is tourism, how to enhance and develop tourism based on the development and supply chain and logistics process that is really needed in the tourism and transportation and imports as well. So I mean, I think the sector is huge, and even in manufacturing, procurement, and transportation. So it's connected to most of the sectors in general. Did this answer your question? Okay.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we have time for now. It's nearly 3 o'clock and time to move on for the next session. But I'd like you to thank all of the speakers today. It's been really enjoyable being up here. Thank you very much.